and today I'm going to talk to you about on being civilized in an uncivilized society. I was waiting for my guest Mel, and we'll see if she's able to show up or not. But if not, I will share with you a little bit about why I wanted to share this and why this is such an important topic to me. So, a little bit about me. I have a background in counseling. I used to be a school counselor. So, I'm a trained advocate. I'm also trained in active listening skills and social skills. And I used to impart these skills in group settings and individual settings for teenagers. So now that I'm a mom of five and I'm raising kids ranging from age 5 to 15, I'm noticing in conversations that I have with them that navigating the social terrain is really tough and tricky. And it's different than it was when I was a kid. I'm 44 years old. So I'm thinking back about 30 years ago, and I'm remembering that I grew up in a generation where personal digital devices didn't exist. So in some ways, we had to organically learn how to communicate in a very informal but structured way. So, for instance, when I would ring the doorbell to visit a friend, I would say, "Hi, Mr. or Mrs. So and so. Could my friend come out and play?" And they would either say, "Sure, let me get them," or they'd say, "Oh, they're doing homework," or they're at piano lessons. And then I'd say, "Okay, thank you. Bye." And it sounds very basic, but these are things that I'm noticing kids don't really naturally or innately understand how to do. And it's almost generalizing into adults of all ages and all age ranges. So that's one thing I wanted to think about when I was thinking about courtesy and manners and tech etiquette. Another aspect of this for me has to do with the fact that empathy is clearly lacking in the way that we communicate with other people. Every time I go to a medical facility, which is often because some of you may know that I'm raising a medically complex child named Sarah, and she has about a dozen specialists that we keep up with regularly. So I am in various medical facilities every week, and they're all different. And some practitioners are independent, some are part of a bigger corporation or network. And it doesn't matter because in the last 2 years, I've noticed that every single location and every single facility has a very specific policy about nonviolence and about consequences for violent or aggressive behavior and speech. And it's posted all over the place publicly. So I was thinking about that and how obviously these places felt like they needed to do that because of the amount of aggressive behavior that was being displayed to their employees. So it just all of these things are kind of swimming around, or I'm mulling them over in my mind in the last couple of years, thinking about this drop in empathy and also what can we do to combat that? And I know that using the verb combat sounds almost like an oxymoron when we're talking about empathy and kindness and compassion. I also think that there is a way to be nonviolent, but to do so in a very clear and direct manner. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what this looks like in my life or ways that I've practiced this skill because I do believe that empathy is a skill that we can learn. It is not necessarily innate to every human being, but I have a lot of hope and a lot of optimism that we can still practice this skill and as we practice it, we can actually allow it to become more natural, a more reflexive response without or automatic response, I think is the right word that I'm looking for. So, one of the things that I like to do when I'm communicating either in person or online is begin with what I call a soft start. And how this works is let's say somebody sends me an email, or let's say they comment on a note that I post or an essay that I wrote. Let's say I'm just talking to a neighbor, it doesn't matter. But most of the time, people are pretty emotionally activated and they're not necessarily using their rational brain. They're in limbic system mode, which means they're not thinking clearly. They're not coming from a centered and grounded place. And so they often might have a defensive tone of voice. The words that they choose to write might be pretty abrasive or brutal, even. And this is a moment where I pause for just a couple of seconds and I go inward and I ask myself, okay, how am I reacting on the inside? Because sometimes I find my defenses coming up, my walls kind of, my armor, I'm armoring up. And what I tend to do then is notice the reaction in the moment and then make a commitment to myself to revisit it later, either in therapy or through journaling. Then I'm able to step back into the present moment and do this soft start. And so what I do is I listen and I just pay attention to whatever this person is talking about, whatever grievance they may have, whatever prejudices or biases they may bring to their particular comment that they want to make known to me. And then I look for a glimmer of positivity or just a word or a phrase that I can connect with. And maybe that is resonant. Maybe it's something that I've never personally experienced, but I could see from an empathic stance on where that person is coming from. And so that's my soft start. That's my inroads. And what I'll do is I'll say, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Or I'll say something like, thank you so much for entrusting that information to me. I hear what you're saying about, and then I'll use that word or phrase. And then I will gently seg into a counter argument, is what I would call it. I don't consciously think of it as that when I'm in the moment. But when I seg into that, I will say something like, I wonder if it could also be possible that, and then I will offer the opposing perspective or viewpoint, or I may simply state my boundaries. I'll say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I wasn't really looking for advice right now. I know that you're coming from a place of good intention, and so I want to acknowledge that was something I do value. So these are ways that I think that we can start to disarm another person who maybe comes at us in a very combative sense and with their armors up, right? Their fists are up. You can feel it. We're absorbing that type of anxiety and irritability and agitation. But we can choose how to respond to that. And I do believe, and I have experienced on more than one occasion, when I have entered into a conversation by acknowledging my own triggers in the moment, making a commitment to revisit them in a private, safe space like my journaling or in therapy, coming back to the present moment and then listening to the other person's perspective, no matter what kind of tone of voice they're using, no matter what kind of phrasing they're using, their behavior. And then I can try to respond in a way that my goal or my aim is to be disarming. It's to get them from a super high level of activation down to kind of an even keel. And many times this works. Sometimes I will say, with the exception that it doesn't always happen. And I think that this is where nuance comes into play. So, on an individual basis, we have to determine for ourselves what feels safe and what doesn't. So, if there's certain language, like violent language that someone's using, or if they're hurling their bodies at us, we absolutely have a right to protect and defend ourselves. We have a right to not respond. So I'll give you an example of this from my recent life, and it would be a picture that I shared on Substack of my 5 kids enjoying ice cream on a late summer day. And a commenter said, "Wow, that's quite a brood you have there. What are you? One of those MAGA brood mares?" Now, I chose not to respond to this person. And there are a couple of reasons that I would choose to just ignore it, like block and delete, something like that. And it's when someone is using very clearly divisive, polarizing, spiteful language that demonstrates their mindset. They are not open to conversation and dialogue. They are not open to listening to another perspective. They're simply there to communicate their biases, their prejudices, and they're really not open minded. And it's pretty obvious by the choice of words that they use. And when this person chose to use dehumanizing language, they didn't say, I'm a who, they said, I'm a that. They compared me to a broodmare. So they were comparing me to a horse solely used for the purpose of breeding. Again, dehumanizing language. And they also assumed that because I have 5 children, I must be a MAGA supporter, which to me was a very strange and illogical leap. But I also understood that because politics was woven into this comment and that the comment was already dehumanizing, I really wasn't going to get anywhere by trying to change this person's mind or their heart. And so instead, I chose to protect my own heart. And I chose to do that by deleting and blocking this person. So I wanted to use that as an example to illustrate that it still is very important for each one of us to determine case by case whether or not we feel safe with this other person. And that can be online and it can be in person. And then if we don't, we have the right to make sure that we are safe and to set up those boundaries, to walk away, to block, to delete, um, or even physically defend ourselves. I absolutely believe in that. However, there are going to be moments where someone is already kind of like wound up. They have a defensive tone of voice. And at the same time, you can kind of sense that if you try to use this empathic soft start by connecting with our common and shared humanity and doing so in a way that allows that person to say, "Oh, I actually feel seen. I feel heard in this moment." And this technique is effective in those cases for a reason. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with a book called Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. But he developed this very specific format of communicating in a nonviolent way for very, very emotionally charged topics that run deep. And when I say that, I'm talking about he used this technique with diplomats who were mediating conflict in the Middle East. And this was like, I mean, it was decades ago that this book came out initially, but it is still being used, especially in anger management classes, group counseling settings, and it is available to purchase on an individual level. To me, it has absolutely been a game changer in the way that I show up and the way that I communicate. Because I don't know when I'm going out in the world or when I log on my computer what I'm going to get. I don't know what I'm going to encounter. I'm not sure what other people are carrying that they're just going to project onto me, that they're just going to dump into my lap. And so I need to be in a headspace where I am ready to respond from my center, from a place that is calm and kind and patient. And that is very difficult. But I'm telling you, each of us can learn how to do it. And it comes with practice and it comes with time. So in this book, Nonviolent Communication, Dr. Rosenberg explains that when we begin with empathy, like I'm telling you, when we listen to the other side, even if they're saying something that is really, really, really stirring something up inside of us, and we feel very reactive, we can learn how to glean something, a seed, even something very small from what they're saying that we can connect with. And once the other party hears that we are not entering into this with the intention of changing their minds, with the intention of arguing or trying to be right, what we're doing is we really want to hear their perspective. Once that happens through the way that we verbalize, "Thank you for what you shared. I'm hearing you. I noticed that you said XYZ, and that really resonated with me because," and then you share something off the cuff. It's almost like you can see and feel the tension just deflate. And often, if you're in person, what you'll notice is the other person's body language demonstrates that shift where they're not armoring up their shoulders, but then you can see this relaxation happen where their shoulders just really unwind. You're going to see their facial muscles where they're really tensed up and they're going to start to relax. And that's when you can have that nonverbal cue that demonstrates to you that this is working and it is disarming. I know a lot of people who work in conflict mediation and especially people who are like first responders, they probably have a different perspective that would even add another layer of information and helpful, I don't know, techniques maybe that I don't have and I can't offer you today. I'm coming to you from a counseling perspective because that's my background and it's what I've practiced over time. I'm also saying that these are tools that anybody can use and anybody can learn. And it's going to feel pretty awkward when you begin to utilize them if you're not used to it. At the same time, the more that you do it, the more you're going to find that it's incredible some of the things that can happen. There were two different people on Substack within the last 6 months who, independently of each other, had commented on one of my notes. And they were pretty politically activated in their response. And I looked at what they wrote and I felt that tension in myself. And I did what I shared with you as I took a moment to just admit and acknowledge that inside of me. And then I made the commitment to return to that later. And in the moment before I typed a response, I thought about, where is this person coming from? Because again, this kind of points to my personal values, though. I believe that people are inherently good. I believe that when people are hateful, they're reacting from a place of woundedness. And there is, in a sense, collective trauma that every single one of us is feeling, is immersed in. And as a result of that, if if a person is not actively self-aware and working on their personal growth, they're likely going to be responding from a place of reactivity instead of intentionality. But I don't have to respond that way. And so what I did with these two separate commenters on my Substack notes is I decided to use the soft start, tell them what I appreciated about what they said. And then I also gently challenged them and said, well, I know some people on this other political side of the spectrum who don't fit what you're saying. And I really think it's important that each one of us takes care to get to know a person for who they are instead of some sort of box or label or container that we assign to them or that they self identify as. And that could be politically, it could be any other category that tends to really produce a strong reaction in people. And since I am speaking as an American citizen, I think all of you who are listening or watching right now can recognize where I'm coming from with that, even if you don't live in the US. It's really widespread, too, that this volatility, that's the word I want to use. This volatility is really spreading like wildfire everywhere. So after I responded to these two people in my comments on my notes, they actually both replied to me and said, you know what? I think you might be onto something. I hadn't thought about that before. And I've been so wrapped up in the headlines and in what I'm seeing happening. And I feel so helpless and powerless that I wasn't really paying attention to the fact that I was kind of participating in this kind of worldview or this mindset. And so I'm sharing these examples with you because they are recent and they are very, very, to me, clearly pointing to how this kind of response from us can actually make a huge difference in what happens in these conversations, in these dialogues. And sometimes people will open their hearts. And there have been other times, of course, where I've tried this technique and people remain stalwart in saying, nope, you're not going to be able to open my mind. This is what I believe. And in those cases, I'll follow up and I'll say, I respect that. I totally respect that. You have a right to your opinion and to believe what you want. I do not tolerate any kind of hate speech or language on my Substack. I do not tolerate it in person. There are certain words I will not allow people to say when they are bigoted, when they are racist, when they are targeting people with disabilities. I don't tolerate it. And I will call people out. I will say I'm choosing not to call people names. I don't believe in ad hominem attacks or character assassinations. I would like to stick with talking to a person in a respectful way. So these are all things that I'm trying to share with you that I feel very strongly about because a big part of why I write and why I show up in this space and also in my real life is because I want to be a bridge. I want to be a harbinger of peace. I want to be a person who can hold this person's hand and this person's hand and be in the middle and say, you both have lived experiences that are valid. You both have truth to share. And there are things about each one of your stories that matters to me and that really can make a difference in the world and how we try to connect with one another. Even people we think I'm never going to be able to reconcile with this person or understand what they're saying and I don't want to. I mean, that's where I think the personal work and the personal growth has to come into play. Because if I myself feel completely and totally closed off from listening to a person's perspective that differs from my own. Maybe it's somebody who has different values than I do, different lifestyle than I do. Um, if I find myself saying something like that to myself, to me that's a signal that I need to go back and excavate the origins of that feeling and that limiting belief. And I need to go ahead and work on that, either in therapy or through journaling or through confiding in a trusted friend, like I shared with you a few times in this video. So, just to wrap up with you, because I don't have my guests and I feel really sad about that because Mel and I have talked about this offline a little bit, and she has some really, really good language and terminology that I wanted her to share with you today. But thank you for those of you who joined me. And I want to also just mention to you that another thing that I do on my Substack is I share essays of people's lived experiences because they're all people from all different walks of life, different ages, different cultures, languages, religious beliefs. And I really believe that through the art and the act of storytelling, this is where we're going to find ourselves opening our hearts to people who are different from us. We are going to find that this is an inroads to greater empathy. I'm not sure if you all are aware of this, but there are scientific studies that point to reading is actually something that does change our brain's ability to empathize with someone. It helps us to become more empathetic, is what I'm trying to say. So, reading stories, especially from people who have different life experiences from us, and doing so with an open mind will help us to then wonder. I wonder what that might be like for someone in that situation. I could see how that could happen. And then as we go out into the world and we encounter other people who have had other types of lived experiences that might kind of overlap with what we've already been reading about, or maybe other conversations we've had with different people, then we're able to go back to, and access that part of our brain that was able to become disarmed and compassion and become more compassionate. And then we can say, that makes sense to me. I hear what you're saying. I understand that. So never underestimate the power of very, very simple phrasing. Never underestimate your tone of voice. And when we're talking about digital communication, it is crucial to begin with kindness. It is crucial to begin with gratitude because nobody is going to see your facial expression. Nobody is going to hear your tone of voice. They are going to read what you write. And if it can in any way be misinterpreted to be divisive or polarizing, you're not going to be able to have a conversation with that person. You're not going to connect with them, and they're not going to be able to be open to connecting with you. So, another thing that I think is important is to remember someone's name and personally address them and to express something that is indicative of gratitude. So, again, begin with awareness of your own emotional triggers. When you read something or when someone directly addresses you, whether in real life or online, be aware of your own triggers. Take a moment to commit to yourself to revisit the origins of those triggers when you are alone and with a safe and trusted person who can help you process them. Then come back into the moment and Commit yourself to being centered and grounded and genuinely listening to the other person with an open mind. As you listen, pay attention to keywords and phrases that resonate with you, that connect with you in some way. When the person is finished sharing whatever it is they want to say, first respond by saying thank you or I appreciate. So that's showing gratitude. Mention their name if you know it personally. Then you can say the specific thing that you connected with, that resonated with you. If it's really a stretch and you can't find that, just try to say something like, I hear what you're saying about. And then you can reflect or mirror back what they've said. Saying something simple like, I hear you, I see you, I understand, I get that. Those are phrases that are disarming. Use them. Use them. After you say the specific word or phrase that you felt a connection with, or that you could at least see that perspective that they're coming from, then if you do have an invitation to offer a different perspective, you can use the phrasing like, I wonder if this might also be true. Or have you ever thought about someone in this situation? Because that's also disarming language. You're not telling someone should or shouldn't. You're not saying that they're wrong and you're right. So we don't want to use those words. We're trying to intentionally avoid using those words because they are going to reactivate that person's inner alarm and they're going to feel threatened by it. And what we're trying to do is soften the edges between us. Try to help us to find each other and find our common humanity and connect on that level. However, the conversation goes from that point is where you can determine if it's taking a turn where you need to close it down. You need to set some clear boundaries about how you don't feel safe. You don't like that they're using particular words because they are offensive. And you can say that directly and in a way that is not going to be as it matching their abrasive level. And I've done this by saying, I choose not to use words like that. That's what I'll say. Or I'm choosing not to say that about a person. I don't believe in making generalizations. I believe that it's more valuable for me to get to know a person on an individual level. Sometimes you might have a longer conversation. Sometimes you both might decide, hey, we didn't necessarily change each other's minds, which wasn't really the goal. There wasn't an agenda. The agenda or the goal was really just to connect, just to see if we can do this. Let's just see if we're able to change the way that we show up and the way that we speak to each other. And the more that we practice these skills, the more natural they will become in our everyday conversations. So I hope that's helpful, friends. Thank you again for being with me. I love to hear your feedback whenever you'd like. And I will post this so that you can watch the replay and share it. Thank you.